So it was the winter of 1976, and I'm living in a log cabin in a small town called Girdwood, about 40 miles outside of Anchorage, Alaska, where I was working at the nearby ski resort. I'd moved to Alaska to make money for college. I'd gone to a big university in upstate New York, and I loathed it. And I then applied and was accepted to a groovy little liberal arts school in New England. But I didn't have enough money to pay for it, so I had to take a year off from school and go make some money. So when my friends called up and said, hey, we're driving through Chicago and going to Alaska, do you want to go? The obvious answer was, hell yeah, let's go. I'd heard about making money at fish canneries, and you could make a lot of money there, and it sounded cool, and we'd all heard about the Northern Lights and orcas and gold rush and all that stuff. And I was like 19 and kind of foolish, and I said, sure. So I got in the car and off we went. 6 months later, I'm working at the ski resort, managing the restaurant at the top of the ski hill, and life was pretty good. I had a girlfriend who lived in a teepee. I had a truck that worked some of the time. I'm living in this shack with these two other knuckleheads. I got a great job. I'm playing guitar around town. And for the first time in my life, I'm actually, supporting myself and making money and had a job. And, life was pretty good. But, and of course there's always buts in these kinds of stories, but it wasn't a very good winter and there wasn't very much snow. In fact, it was the worst snow year that anybody had ever seen or heard of. When it did snow, it only came halfway down the mountain. And then it turned to ice, and that isn't very good for a ski resort. So come January, they laid off a lot of people, including me. And this is where the story takes a turn, of course. I hurt my leg skiing one day, and I end up in my dark, cold, wet cabin because we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water, and it was pretty miserable, and we're burning cardboard boxes sprinkled with kerosene to stay warm, and eating a lot of mashed potatoes because one of my knuckle-headed flatmates had stolen a 50-pound bag of instant potato flakes. So I realized this wasn't a good way to get to college. I had to make some choices. And I had three choices, really. One, I could go into Anchorage and get a real job. Two, I could go back home to Chicago and admit defeat, which wasn't going to happen. And number three, I could go into Anchorage and sign up for unemployment. So at this time in Anchorage in Alaska, unemployment was easy to get. Everybody got it. It was very common, certainly among the people I was hanging out with. In the summertime in Alaska, the sun never sets, and people get these high-paying union jobs working on the gas pipeline or doing construction or in fisheries or this or that. And then they take the next 6 months off and skive, basically. They went to Hawaii and surfed or lay on a beach or went skiing, and they collected unemployment for those 6 months. And then they come back and repeat. And I thought, this is a great kind of gig. I wanted a piece of this action, right? The thing was, I grew up in this suburb, north of Chicago, kind of liberal suburb, and this is not something that we did. In fact, my mom would always tell me, people like us do not take unemployment. So, in spite of this, or perhaps because of this, I was determined to go into Anchorage and sign up for unemployment. So the next day, there I am, hitchhiking my way into Anchorage, and I get to the unemployment office, and kind of to my surprise, but maybe a good surprise, I found that there were hundreds of other people who had the same great idea of trying to get paid without doing any work. And the line went out the door. So somewhat relieved, I went, and I walked out, and telling myself that I'd come back after lunch, and I'd try again. Now, I'd heard stories that you could get a job on these ships that the U.S. government had, and sailing around Alaska. It was called NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And they did fishery research in the summertime out in the Bering Sea and out in the Aleutians. And you could get a union job there and make lots of money, which is the goal here. And it sounded cool, so I thought, hey, it's February. And the ships don't come up to the summertime, but why don't I just go over there and sign up now so when the ships do come, I can get a job. So I cross the street, find the NOAA office, go up the stairs, fill out the form. It didn't take long because I was 19 and had not much of a work history. And there was this guy, this big Alaskan dude in a uniform, and he's like, he looks over my application for a while, and the interview starts, and he says, have you ever been arrested? I'm like, He said, any time in jail? No. Have you been in a gang? No. You sell drugs? Take drugs? And this went on for about another 5 minutes. It was not going well. And finally he stops and he looks at me and he stares at me and he says, well, son, tell me this. When are you free? And it turns out that there was one ship in the waters in Alaska and it had one job available. There was a guy who'd worked in the galley, which is ship speak for kitchen, and he got seasick a lot and projectile vomited all over the galley, which wasn't good for business for them. And there was one applicant, this guy, this refugee from the unemployment line who could barely walk, showed up to apply for this job. So 3 days later, the seaplane ride and a helicopter ride and a jet plane ride and a boat ride, I end up on this dock looking at the gangplank to a 270-foot stern trawler, which was my home for the next 7 months. And that's how I got to be in the Bering Sea.